All right. Hey guys. What we're looking at real quick, I'm going to make this video as to the point as I can. This is a classmate's final draft. I'm not going to tell you what they got. I'm not going to do any of that. All right. If you are watching this video and you realize this is your draft, don't freak out. No one else knows that. I took your name off it. Okay. You're good. No trouble there. All right. Let's jump right in. We have an introduction here. I'm not going to spend probably any time on that because, quite honestly, there are issues in this introduction that warrant talking about, but most of you, this draft included, if you struggled in the paper, you struggled with what I'm going to highlight in the body of the paper. Of course, first thing you got to do, we're going to look at two paragraphs. I'll give you just a second to pause it here and read the paragraph in front of you because we're going to talk about it. So go ahead and pause it, do that. All right. Hopefully you did that. If not, you're not a fan of directions. Anyway, so what do we have here? Well, a couple things we can highlight structurally first. Starting with the very first sentence, the little boy simply does not thoroughly think things through before he makes statements, comma splice there. He hears no wrong in his staggering statement to his father. I have a note on the writing when we get to the next paragraph, but if you notice some issues with it, you're correct. Anyway, the issue with this sentence is that it is not a topic sentence. We talked about these in class, right? Topic sentence, among other things, needs to be an argument, needs to be something we're proving, right? But what are we doing here? The boy does not think things through before he makes statements. He doesn't know that his question is somehow wrong. All those things are very true. Those are summary. So we start off without an argument. We then move to the quotation. He inquired. And then we have some pretty good lines. Mindlessly, as I would ask if he ever saw DiMaggio or Mantle, why we dropped the bombs on those two towns in Japan. Now, my question is, and this is what I wanted to highlight in this draft, this is the issue many of you had. What are we doing with that quotation? There's a couple ways to think about this question, and there's a couple ways that the issues manifest, but basically, think back to how we talk about it in class. You quote for language, you're using language, you're talking about something specific in these lines that we can dig into and investigate and discuss the significance of. But we don't really do that here, right? We say, basically, young people will ask mindlessly. That's true. That's true without the poem. Children don't know what's acceptable. That's true without the poem. DiMaggio and Mantle are famous. That's true without the poem. We get to the poem here. The baseball players are significant. Okay, they tell us about the boy's youth, what he finds interesting. That could maybe be the beginning of some analysis, but we got to move beyond that. For instance, again, we always talk about argument has to be something worth proving. Your argument cannot be, those baseball players that boy mentioned. He's probably really into them. It's like, yeah, that's how that works, right? That's banal. We do try to tie that somehow. We have a real problem with adjective and adverbs, this uninhibitably, all these like filler words we have in here. But again, I'm trying to save that for the next paragraph. The fact that the boy asks his father about these bombs shows that his lack of insight. I'm not sure what they mean by applicable affairs, but again, like, what are we dressing up what we're really saying? The boy somehow does not know what he's asking, right? He doesn't understand the weight, the gravity of what he's asking his father. Okay, we can start there, right? Our analysis starts there. And what I mean by that is, again, first of all, if I approached you and said, oh yeah, this, like, I don't know, how old do you think this kid is? 7-ish, something like that. Yeah, this 7-year-old boy, asks his dad about the atomic bombs. He doesn't know what he's talking about, and you're like, yeah, of course he doesn't. He's 7. So if that's our only claim, again, that's banal, but we can start there. Now, the problem, and the reason I keep phrasing it that way with saying we're going to start there, is look at where it comes in the paragraph. We're almost out of time. This idea should be here, or at the very least, here. You got to do that quicker. Now, again, I tell you guys all the time, draft how you draft, write how you write, absolutely. But then when it comes to editing, before you turn your work in, you have to sometimes delete and rewrite and add, right? So much of this we just don't need. It just doesn't help us. We're not saying anything. We start to say something uh, here. We start to here. Now the question is, with the little time that we have, what do we do with that something? Adolescents become aware of questions they ask. Um, we're basically saying he's curious. Again, that's banal. It's clear they haven't taught him what I guess not to ask questions like that, and that you learn it when you get older. I can't get inside the student's head to know why they don't really investigate anything that they start to bring up about the quotation. They're just kind of swirling at the surface. Um, but there's two ways to address this. I gave you one of them, which is we need to trim a lot of this. And I would tell you right now, everything we say here, you could basically sum up in a sentence. And what is that? The little boy is ignorant. You're coming off of this sentence, ignorant of what he's asking. He doesn't understand the world. He doesn't understand politics, warfare, whatever you like, right? You could do that in a sentence. We're talking about his ignorance, his innocence. All right, so you have this sentence, you have that sentence, two sentences after this quotation. Where do we go from there? Again, we've done next to no work with the quotation itself. You could have paraphrased this and done all this, right? So when we say we quote for language, what can we pull from these lines that we might use? We cite DiMaggio and Mantle, but we really don't use them. Again, what do we prove with those names? We prove that he likes those baseball players. Sure, that's not analysis, right? Um, what are we doing in the quotation? Well, one interesting thing that they kind of maybe are thinking about, we parallel the knowledge that this boy has. He knows about DiMaggio and Mantle, and he somehow knows about these bombs. One of those bits of knowledge is expected. You would expect a boy in the middle of the country in like the 50s or 60s, to know about DiMaggio and Mantle. That makes sense for a little boy. Atomic bombs, man, not so much. That kind of it catches his father off guard. So it tells us this is unexpected. Okay, so what? That's the perhaps difficult, but that's the question we have to answer. That's what analysis is. If at any point you can answer a so what, or what does this mean, or why do we care, and it maybe takes you a second to figure it out, that's when you know probably you're on the right track. Okay. DiMaggio or Mantle, why we drop the bombs on, why is that significant that he knows these two things? Well, you have to kind of theorize a little bit, right? How would he have learned about DiMaggio or Mantle? I mean, they're kind of everywhere, and he's probably into baseball, and it's just something you would know, especially as a little boy, being into little boy things in the 50s and 60s. That just makes sense. Well, what about atomic bombs? How does he learn about that? Again, these lines are asking you to parallel those two pieces of information, to kind of say that they're equal in some regard. Well, what did we just say about DiMaggio or Mantle? That they're kind of everywhere, right? You don't even really have to be a baseball fan, especially at that time, to hear about these guys. They're huge. Um, Baseball was huge, right? It's just kind of everywhere. It just permeates everything. Well, then doesn't that sort of say the same thing about this other knowledge? The There's no telling where the boy learned about it. Could it have been school? Sure. Could it have been just like walking down a street, or he overheard the radio? Like, could have been anything, right? Because it's everywhere. So, what are we focused on in this paragraph? Well, we were talking about, in what we have anyway, his ignorance, and thus his innocence, which again comes down to knowledge. And here in this quotation, we're in some way talking about the knowledge that he does have. So, all of this is a question of knowledge, and what does he know, and why does that matter? it's hard to maybe do this in a vacuum. Like, it's hard to talk about this just as a single paragraph. But that's the question you have to answer, is what are we saying about the knowledge this boy has and how it works, or what it is. If I were rewriting this paragraph, I would start with that question, and I have an answer that I'm not going to give to you right now. Um, but as a student, I would maybe write that off to the side, and like that's what I gotta think about when it comes to these lines. Now, to help us a little bit, we do have another paragraph that I have down here, and it's longer. So what I'm going to do for you, I'm going to give you. Oops, sorry. I'm going to give you just a second again, and you can pause it and read this bit. So go ahead, and I'll shut up. Go ahead and pause it. All right, again, hopefully you had time to do that. And I'm going to scroll just so you can see the end of it. Go ahead and pause it again, and same thing. Go for it. Okay, so this one's longer. And before we get into the actual paragraph itself, I do have to highlight the reason it's so long. This isn't the only reason, but it's a big one. The way this person writes, I only want to take a second on this. Some of you, enough of you, are under the misconception that writing like this is a good idea. Um, I've taught enough to my theory to be that this impresses someone like in high school or something. I don't know. I don't know why so many of you are writing like this. It's not good. That I'm being as nice as I can. Okay, this is not a good way to write. Um, it's a lot of filler. And it's a lot of you just using a thesaurus and using words either incorrectly or inartfully. And it's very obvious to a trained reader, such as myself or anyone else you'll encounter, at the very least in a class like this, that you're just shoving in words you don't know how to use, and it's distracting. The reason I highlight it for you is it's distracting. When you want me to focus on your ideas and your arguments, you do not want me focused on poor word choice and awkward phrasings, and we have a lot of it in this paragraph. More to the point, we also have a lot of unnecessary adjectives, some adverbs that are really getting in the way. You could cut a lot of this stuff. Basically, and the other reason I highlight it for you, I think a lot of the time when you guys write like this, you think you're doing more than you actually are. Like, you think you're making an argument because it sounds like you're making an argument because you're using all these cool words, but you're not. If you translate it, if you maybe dumb it down in terms of the register, you'll often see that you're just giving me summary and observation, and you're kind of falling into a trap linguistically, basically. All that said, let's try to talk about this real quick. Our topic sentence again. Without hesitance, the little boy did not regret what he said, aforesaid, did not regret what he said. He did not associate his father's reaction to the question. That's summary. Again, we know that, right? So maybe that's context for the quotation, but we absolutely don't have a topic sentence. So let's see what we can figure out. The father's confusion is exhibited when his face goes all wooden. This huge quotation. Oh my goodness, I forgot how big this quotation was. So already we're setting ourselves up for failure. Like we talked about in class, a quotation this large, I'd say 95% of the time, you're not going to be able to talk about even half of it. It's just too big. It's too big. There's some good lines in here. There's actually quite a few of them in here, but you can't take all this on. And what do you do typically uh, when faced with a lot of information? You summarize, you gloss, you talk about it in general terms. All of these things are exactly the opposite of what we want to do in all of our papers. So let's see how that goes. As conveyed, the young boy's father is unhappy. Sure, that's summary. By the speaker's description, the father is unhappy. Yep, we got that. That's summary. The boy does not understand. That's summary. The father's response is somehow symbolic of the little boy's youth. Okay, that's the beginning of analysis. Again, real quick, look at what we've done. Now, phrasing issues aside, I've mentioned that, and that stuff's getting in the way, and it's baggy, and fine. This is the beginning of our analysis, perhaps, which means all this is unnecessary. So we cut that. Now, what do we do after this? As a parent, preserving, I guess protecting is what you want to say, from the horrors of the world, people within the world is redundant. We live in is critical amongst most. I don't know what that means. The father is shielding his son. Okay, we're on to something. I think, look, as soon as they started analysis, look, first of all, they gave themselves more room. It does happen much quicker than it did in the previous paragraph. We're actually trying to say something here. Now, here's my question, though. We finally started analysis. How do we get here? We have to prove this, right? Right now, it's an assumption. We have done no work to like we're pulling this as evidence, right? Like you could think about it at like a trial if you want. If you've ever seen like Law and Order or something like that, you're the prosecutor and you're saying the father is trying to shield his son, and they're like, well, how do you know? Prove it from here. Prove it to me. Um, I mean, with what we have, the Saipan, Tini, and Okinawa, I felt like they owed it to me. I don't think that's talking about protecting anybody, right? We could probably cut that. Lawn chair, family photograph, 1945. Could probably cut that, right? I don't know who's being protected there. So I guess we're left with the top part. Something in here. Face goes all wooden, eyes freezing like rabbits in headlights, the palm of his hand slowly tapping the arm of the lawn chair. Okay. Do we do anything with that? Let's see. His response, we're alluding to what we just highlighted, so maybe we want to talk about it there. His response tells us something about the boy. I would love to know how that works. I'm being totally honest with you. I'm having a hard time with that. If I were trying to prove that, I would struggle, to be honest with you. The boy has questions. We know that. He's already asked a question. This is fluff. Why are people? You're just describing war. It's like, okay. Assuming the father is a veteran, we know he's a veteran. The poem tells us, so you don't have to assume. Look at all that. Look at. I mean, again, I just want to. It may feel like I'm being mean. I'm not. I want to show you something. None of this. We know he's a veteran. We know his son's curious. He specifically asked about the bomb. We don't need any of that. We can cut all of that. It's just filler. The father does not want to share his experiences. We know that because he doesn't share them. Uh, I mean, sure, but the father is doing what any parent should do. You want to try to avoid should. And at this point, we're not talking about the poem. Only save yourself from the truth. How to think and remember what he could have witnessed. Maybe. He may not be reliable. That's interesting. But he's doing it because he loves his son, protects his son's innocence. That's interesting. Okay. So we kind of our work cut out for us. It seems like they're interested in saying the father wants to protect his son's innocence. Okay. Maybe we talk about that. Now, whether or not we're going to talk about that in this paragraph, I cannot tell you. But what I can tell you is, again, we have done zero work with this quotation. Let's do that for just a second, and then I'll end the video. I'll talk a little bit about revision plans at the end after this, and then I will end it because like I said, I want to keep it as short as I can. What language could we dig into here in the highlighted bit? His face goes all wooden. That's interesting. What does it mean to have a face like wood? It's immovable. It's inert, right? Like it's not alive. It's almost like he's sculpted or cut from something, right? Like he's made here. That's an interesting idea. After that, the eyes freezing like rabbits in headlights. I think around here we more commonly think of deer in headlights, but maybe they don't have a lot of deer up there. I don't know. What's a rabbit in the headlights? We talked about this in class. It's helpless. It freezes in headlights. It waits for you, if you're in the car, to make a decision for it, right? If it freezes like that. So we talk about control, we talk about power, and the lack of decision making, right? That's interesting. The palm of his hand slowly tapping the arm of the lawn chair. That one's harder. I mean, there could be something there, but the language just isn't as rich. So it kind of like it makes your job harder. To me, it seems like our best bet, again, just in terms of language, has got to be this, right? And the most readily available idea is that question of power, lack of decision making, lack of choice, right? Okay, well, if we're going to talk about that, if we're going to cite this quotation, which we have, again, the question is so what? The father, when he's asked this question, freezes as if he has no control, no power, no choice. In what regard, right? What does he not have a choice about? Um, could be a couple things. I mean, he couldn't choose for his son to ask that question. That's pretty interesting, especially when you think about how shaken he does seem to be about the question. Now, given the narratives we have about all kinds of things, I'm not going to get into for the sake of this video. Um, our student here kind of instantly spins off into like bomb bad, war bad, all this stuff, um, which is a little bit oversimplified, and frankly, that's not what's happening here. All that stuff is involved, but again, what is the real crisis moment in the poem? It is, as they allude to by the end, the fact that the son knows about any of this at all, right? To be as young as he seems to be and to start to know about the things that he's asking his dad about shakes his father. You guys are so quick to say, oh, the dad has PTSD, blah, which again is not helpful. Obviously, he has like PTSD or something. That's not an argument worth making. Um, I think what's more interesting is if you are as specific as you can be, he is shaken by the fact that his son has started to learn about this stuff. So, what do we do with that? If that is actually what has him frozen like rabbits in headlights, right? We talk about power, we talk about choice, the lack of it. What has he not chosen here? What does he not have power over here? Well, it seems to be he definitely didn't choose for his son to know this stuff about those towns in Japan, right? Um, so we're basically saying he doesn't have the power, just like we talked about in all kinds of other avenues when we talked about this poem in class, but he also doesn't have the power to keep his son from this knowledge, right? That's interesting, especially given some true assumptions they make at the end about like what parents want to shield their kids from and stuff like that. Um, but if we tie it to the poem, because we haven't really done that, sure, the dad wants to do all that, but it tells us here that he can't. That's another thing he just cannot keep his son from. Can't keep his son from knowledge, can't keep his son from, if you're gaining knowledge, then you're losing innocence. Like he cannot protect his son from the world in that way. And then the question I'll leave you with here, and again, I won't answer it for you, but why does it shake him like that? Forget the PTSD nonsense, please. That's not helpful. As a father, why does it shake him? Like the sort of recognition in this moment that he can't keep his son from this world, right? He can't shield him from it as badly as he may want to. That's a question worth trying to answer. That's an argument, right? The why is an argument. All right. So the revision stuff, it's hard during the summer, to be honest with you. Initially, I planned for you guys not to have a revision opportunity at all, which is not something I'm terribly comfortable with, but we have no time, right? It's just crazy. So, what I've decided, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in class, is I will give you guys um, basically until the end of the semester. I'm going to come at you with a hard date. I don't want to just say till the end of the semester, like in a nebulous way. I'll have a hard date for you next week, but basically, alongside the last two papers we have to write, the second one coming up, and the third one is at the end of the semester, you will be able to revise this paper and turn it into turnitin.com. I'll make a new spot for it. It'll be called Revision 1, okay, for paper 1. You'll be able to turn in a new copy of this paper. Hopefully, you'll do better by the end of the semester. I'll have it up sooner than that, but I'll give you until then. Like I said, I'll talk about it next week. I told you to make this video short, and God knows I haven't kept to that promise. But yeah, that's all I got. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope no one heard my kids screaming upstairs because I definitely can. And yeah, talk to you on Monday. Thanks.